Yeah, absolutely. Like another area where we went, we went to Leipzig, which is very famous for the Gose beer style. And, Gose beers are sour, and they're known for being sour and salty. And I don't know, my perception of trying the Gose beers for the first time, actual beers from Leipzig, was, they're not as sour and not as salty as I was kind of expecting. And it sort of highlights an Australian brewer. We get caught in our own little Australian craft beer bubble, and we're going, I'm going to make a Gose. And all that style of beer that you're making is what your perception of what you think it should be. But it's not until you actually go there and try it where you're like, oh, right, okay, so there's some some nuances in this beer. There's some finesse. There's little things that you need to sort of pick out, that they're not overly salty and they're not necessarily fruity, although you can get them with fruit in them. But you just need to be observant and mindful of these really cool styles. So
roughly about this time last year, I brewed my first ever Gose, a style that I'd never made before. So actually did a bit of research about where the style had come from and all that sort of thing, and read a book by Fal Allen, who's the brewmaster at Anderson Valley in the States, who's sort of, I guess, reinvigorated Gose as a style for craft brewers. And he actually went to Leipzig, the city we went to, and caught up with some of the brewmasters we got to meet and sort of studied the history of it. And the style has evolved so much over the years, but I've actually lost parts of history about it. And there is this perception of the salty, sour beer. But I think that was more to do with the water source and also the brewing techniques at the time, where they were brewing them in open-top fermenters where wild yeast, bacteria could just fall into the fermenter. That was where they were getting their sourness from. And then originally they weren't made in Leipzig, so made in a little town called Goslar, where the name Gose comes from. And the water source used to run by salt mines. So they actually probably had a pretty high salinity count in the water. And that's sort of how the style, or people's perception of the style, originated.
How would your perception of the style, like your first Gose that you brewed last year, and how you sort of perceived it in your mind, having never been to Leipzig, how did that actually compare to what you actually
It's quite
drank?
different. To be honest, when we make the Gose still, I make it more like a Berliner Weiss, where we sour it in the kettle. Mm-hmm. Whereas I don't think any of the beers we drank were kettle soured.
No.
So even that alone, that's a massive difference in the way they make the beer. But that was my perception of what the beer should taste like, to give it that sort of acidity.
Almost like you're brewing a salty Berliner Weiss as opposed to
that's pretty much
Gose.
what I thought it was. But now, having been there and drinking beers from the Gose houses, actually were a lot different. To me, it almost tasted like a slightly acidic Kolsch or something like that. Yeah. And we went to probably 3 or 4 and they're all different. So it's quite interesting.
Some of them even had like a Brettanomyces, so like a funky kind of character to them. And we were sort of going, and we picked up on it and we looked at the style guideline. And we went, oh, yeah, that's actually a valid characteristic of it. And so I think probably if you looked at it from a technical and historical perspective, it's like they obviously didn't have good control over the microorganisms and sanitation and that sort of thing, and that's just how they wound up, and that's what they were drinking.
And so there's a slight randomness factor to how it was in the beginning that's just curated the style.
The style is one of the oldest styles that's recorded. So in that sort of area of northern Germany, they were brewing a beer that became known as Gose, and it went through periods of time where it just kept evolving. And there's all this lost history, which is sad, but also little chunks of history of how the style should taste. And then the next brewer got a hold of it and they evolved it and so on and so on. As to what we sort of perceive it as now.
It's good that the brewers have still taken that and maybe they've added their own spin to it a little bit, but still tried to carry that on through.
And the interesting thing, actually, the Ryan Hasengebot that Hendo was talking about before, I don't even think that's how you say it, is the German purity law. This beer style is not part of it. So you can actually make a Gose that doesn't have to follow those strict laws. Yeah. So that's quite interesting in itself. Yes.
Why is that?
I'm not sure why that is. They got an exemption by one of the kings at one stage. So
he's obviously had someone gone, it's pretty good.
Yeah, it's gone through periods where it's been very popular and it's died off and had a rebirth. So
you think about the Reinheitsgebot, right? They call it a German beer purity law. but in 1516 it was about beer was food, and so it's like we have food laws now or food standards that we take for granted, but they didn't have anything like that at the time, and so they had to balance things like making sure that people were getting what they paid for, that their beer was actually beer. They also wanted to protect the wheat crop from being diverted into beer, so wheat is not allowed in. They wanted to. Is wheat in the Reinhardt's Gebot?
No.
So no wheat beers.
Okay. And so they wanted to stop wheat from being diverted from making bread to making beer. So hence it was all barley and that sort of thing. What's a Hefeweizen then? Is that Reinhardt's Gebot? Because we went to the Schneiderweiss in Munich. That was good.
I'm not sure. That's
in Australia. Like you say, if you make a wheat beer, like no one's going to buy it because we don't have this thing built up in our head that we don't like wheat beer. But we spent a day in Munich. We went to the Schneiderweiss beer hall it wasn't in the Oktoberfest, it was in Munich in the Old Town. That was awesome. We had some really cool.
That's another example. All they do is make wheat beers.
Yeah.
Whereas
it's a brewery that just makes wheat beer.
They wouldn't fly in Australia at all.
Yeah.
You couldn't get away with that.
You'd be so broke.
So and some of them were absolute crackers. So it's just, again, tradition that's been going on for 700 odd years. But they just make this particular style of beer and it's loved, which is great.
I'm sure after 700 years they've got that down pat.
Yeah.
Too,
Absolutely. So, but it wasn't like Matty was saying, it wasn't until we really got to Berlin where we actually got to go to some craft breweries. I mean, I think the closest thing we got to before that was after we went to the Hop Harvest. Florrie sent us to the Bathurst global headquarters where they have like a little 100-litre pilot brewery with 20 odd tanks in there, and they're just constantly brewing with these hop varieties, trying to make something new. But when we got to Berlin, then we actually got to try some craft beers. Very, sort of modern and eclectic city, and so craft beer really sits in well with the Berliner culture. You're being experimental and progressive and that sort of thing. So
there's similar range of varieties that we would have here, and maybe in America and things like that.
Interestingly, it was quite similar to going to a craft brewery in Australia or the States, where they're making American pale ales, American IPAs, all that sort of stuff that we would make here. So that they're making in the German craft breweries.
I was keen for an American pale ale by the time we got to Berlin.
After drinking lots of lager.
So basically, at the Oktoberfest, at lager is that main beer, but obviously they're different styles.
Helles and Märzen in Oktoberfest. Yep, just lagers, and then getting to Berlin and trying some IPA and all that sort of stuff. Even then, the brewers themselves weren't necessarily German. They might have been a British or a Scottish, import or something like that.
We met an Australian brewer at one of the breweries.
We met an Australian brewer, yeah, that was pretty cool. And even then, they're still very conservative with what they do. So they're not really. We never saw one milkshake IPA or anything like that. The thing is that the styles of beer, even though they were like sort of American skewed variants of that, they didn't really turn the dial up to 11 or anything like that. So there was still that sense of being traditional and true to what a German brewer believes in, or even the German consumer and that sort of thing. So it was very interesting. Good beers, but very interesting to see. So
I suppose everything's a supply and demand thing, no matter where you are anyway.
No. In Germany, beer's a commodity. It's everywhere, and it's cheap. Like Stone Brewing had built a massive brewery in Berlin, thinking that they were going to take craft beer to all of Europe and the Germans, and we'd get them off their fizzy yellow beer and that sort of thing. But the Germans love their fizzy yellow beer, and they value it, and it's part of deeply ingrained in their culture, and so they're very protective of it. And so, that brewery since got sold to Brewdog. What was your favourite beer in Germany? You had a lot.
Yeah.
Not like, point
just
the finger
Germany,
at you.
not the whole 8 weeks, just think Germany.
Road beers.
Road beers?
Road beers.
My favourite one of my favourite beers in Germany was definitely the Augustiner.
Augustiner, yeah.
Augustiner. We were talking before about Oktoberfest, and I think there's only 5 or 6 main breweries, and then from there, their beers are spread throughout the tents. But the Augustiner is still family owned, and the only sort of independent brewery that's at Oktoberfest, and it's very traditional. So as Hendo mentioned, they still serve beer off wooden casks. So literally a big 400-litre cask with a little bronze tap, and that's how they serve their beer.
Yep.
So then that beer it's delicious. Originally it was made by monks.
You can get it everywhere, all over Germany, even up in Berlin. You could go to, Aldi and get like Augustiner Helles, and it's the beer that suits the style. And I aspire to make a beer as good as Augustiner Helles.
So cutting ahead in our travels a little bit, after we left Hendo at the Berlin airport, Emma and I drove through Prague, Budapest, and had to drop the car back in Munich where we'd hired it. So we stayed in Salzburg for a couple of nights before we were due to go back to Munich. So Salzburg used to be part of Bavaria. It's almost on the border as part of Austria. And we got there and my beautiful wife said, I've got a bit of a surprise for you. And funnily enough, there was an Augustiner Brau in Salzburg.
Oh, no way.
So this brewery that we loved at Oktoberfest, they actually had a brewery there and an old beer hall. It was actually...
I'm not sure if they're related, the Salzburg one and the Bavarian one.
Oh, right.
But no, I don't know.
That's
I'm going to do some research on that.
Yeah.
I don't mean to weed you out about that.
Again, this had been here since 1300.
But it's still bloody good regardless.
So it's 800 years old. And this is a Monday night. We rolled in there. There would have been 5,000 people at this beer hall. So you go in there and you...
Because Monday.
It's a Monday.
And you're also 2 hours drive from Oktoberfest.
So you go in there and you choose. You either have a half mass, half a litre, or a full mass, and then pay the man. And they're the same. The barrels aren't quite as big. I think they were 200 litres. But again, they're serving it straight off the wood. So if anyone's ever seen the beer tragedy, go to the Breakfast Creek Toad.
Just tapping
have his 4X off the wood. This is where it actually came from.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
he's seen that and gone, where can I do this here?
Yeah, I think so.
And the best thing was like the food that goes with the beer. You know, we ate so much Feinhaxen, which is like this big pork knuckle, and that was just the benchmark of every town that you went to is what's the pork knuckle like, because in Bavaria it's like roasted. If you go to, say, Frankfurt, they boil it. It's different in Leipzig and that sort of thing. And so pork knuckle, Kartoffelknödel, which is like potato dumpling, and
sauerkraut. That's the German diet.
That's the diet.
But I mean that's great because it's like they're the other thing that's the other thing that complements the brewery. You know, you've got the beer, the food coming there for everything, and you wanted to go around and try that as well. So.
The food was pretty much no matter where you went, it was always pork knuckle. You would always get sausages of various types. You would get like schnitzel would be pretty rare, but always half chicken. And there was like these little sort of beer halls just in Munich that would just be a beer hall that would be revolve around roast chicken. And you just get a half a roast chicken.
It's really, though, if you look at it and how the craft beer scene has evolved, firstly, I guess, in the States and now here in Australia, it's all about the brew pub. And really that has come from like Germany, where they have the beer hall, where they actually have the brewery there. You go to the beer hall where the beer's made, and that's what we're doing now. We're basically recreating that. It's really taken off in the States, and then here in Australia, like here, for example, like we seat 100 people. It's nearly exactly the same. You want to go to the source where the beer's made, and that was probably the best thing about it.
And then there's the whole, there's the community aspect to it as well. It's a place that, we're so stuck in sitting in our own lounge rooms and watching Netflix, whereas we could be in a local beer hall conversing with our neighbours, drinking locally made beer, made in this neighbourhood, and that creates a community in itself. So
it's almost like your local football side that you support. It has that sense of like community and sort of that feeling that you're proud of like your local brewery and that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like even though there's a lot of things that are different, a lot of things still remain the same.
Oh, absolutely.